Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our first edition of this pilot called Knights of the Tax Roundtable. My name is Justin Chu, and joining me, I have Sarah Castro from the Coachella Valley Community Tax Services and Desmond Leong from Metro St. Louis Community Tax Coalition. And we're here to talk about quality. As it stands, the filing season is right around the corner, even though we just got out of it, and we really should talk a little bit about quality. And so for the first discussion questions, I want to levy to you two, is what is one thing that volunteers should look for during this filing season?
Hi, Justin. This is Sarah. So I think that one thing is that the economic impact payment is going to be something we need to think about in 2020. So taxpayers that didn't receive the economic impact payment or didn't receive the full amount, we want to make sure that we're able to get that for them when they file their 2020 tax return. The other thing is that if a child was born in 2020, we want to be able to get them the additional child payment amount on their 2020 tax return. I think also we're going to be seeing people that come in that are that filed with a non-filer tool and still need to file their 2019 tax return. And so we can help them paper file that return. So I think we're going to be seeing people that still need help with the economic impact payment.
All right, Desmond, what about you? What do you think?
Yes, hi. I think that overall, we're going to have to learn a new way of delivering services to our clients. It's also going to be new for the clients also. I think the days of the brick and mortar situation of a client walking in the door with their some documents and walking out the door with a copy of the tax return, I think those days might be pretty much over with. As I'm hearing that a number of sites are going to appointments only or drop-offs. So that in and of itself will extend the time it takes to prepare the return. So some missing documents, the methodology that you're going to use to get those missing documents, whether you're going to be using the Get Your Refund small model or other virtual models that are kind of out there. The other thing I think will take longer, or at least a learning curve for our volunteers, is the use of tools like Zoom and WebEx, Skype, if they're not already familiar with it, particularly if your volunteer base is older and may not be accustomed to it. So I'm looking at it more from a non-tax standpoint of how it's going to impact our workers and how it's going to impact our clients.
Yeah, and I think that really deals with sort of, the COVID in the room, right? Like, I think that there's a lot of concern and anxiety around the pandemic and how to even deliver all of this. And before we started rolling, you talked a little bit about sort of building in quality review for non-traditional services like alternative service delivery. Desmond and Sarah, do you guys want to share a little bit about what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we're planning for is that volunteers will be more independent in the virtual environment. And so we want to make sure that volunteers have all of their VITA materials, their publications, that they have access to the VITA helpline, and in the cases where states have VITA state helplines, that they know that number, that they have ways of communicating with their site coordinator and other volunteers to get help with difficult tax law and software issues they may be having. I think the other I think that's one thing that that we're going to really focus on.
There's a lot of, we are part of the conversation on the listserv is like there's a lot of planning and a lot of stuff that comes around to it. And sort of what is something that you think about when you analyze a non-traditional quality review, right? You talked about people walking in and that's not really going to happen as much. So what is something that you would want to do to make sure that your volunteers are prepared?
Okay. I think that, again, we go back to knowing our volunteers, our preparers, our interviewers also. But we have preparers that have been with us for a long time. We have clients that come back to us from year to year. So, so there's a judgment call as far as how we do the review. We have so many sources of information. We have the prior year's returns that we wanted to go back and look at that. Because in a non-traditional setting now, we're going to have the time to go back and look at last year's return possibly and see what consistencies there are. We know a lot of our clients. And because of that, the review may not have to be line by line 100% review as if we were auditing the return. And I think that's one of the challenges that we've all faced, particularly with new reviewers as we bring them on. I like to think of our volunteer team as you've got the bench players and you've got your all-stars. And depending on who's preparing, who's interviewing, that will also set the tone of how you review. Because if you know your team, you know that some of them have certain areas that need a lot of improvement, and there are some that you could just leave alone and let them do their work. So I think some type of an assessment of your team, assessment of your clients, if you know them, I think that's all part of your structure and how you review a return.
And going off of that team building, right? I think the team sort of there's a lot of specialized roles in VITA. I think there's obviously going to be roles for people coming into it. I know this is not really exactly with our quality discussion, but I'm curious about to hear your thoughts on new volunteers. Do you feel like you'll have a new wave of volunteers who come in with non-traditional as potentially some like more experienced volunteers or older volunteers may drop off due to fears of the pandemic or timing or just difficulty with the software?
That's the question I've been kind of dealing with the last couple of weeks, is not only how are we going to conduct services in the future, but are our volunteers willing to come back given the setting? Regardless of what protections we put in place, there's still going to be that apprehension. If you're going to offer them the ability to work from home or to work remote and be as fully virtual as you can be, then you might be able to encourage some of your team to come back. As far as incorporating your new people in, one thing I've always found is that given the choice, they'd rather prepare rather than, well, no, I take that back. They'd rather do intake because then they don't have to fool with the software, and not realizing that intake is probably the hardest job to do. So I try to encourage them to prepare. And then once they prepare, then they can figure out and learn what questions they need to ask. And then we transition them to an intake role. Now, in this virtual setting, it's going to be a little difficult as far as how to do interviewing. that I see that more of a challenge than actually preparing the return.
And I think that's a great point, Desmond, and that we want to have people in the intake role that are seasoned and that they have the, that they're going to have the tax knowledge to be able to know quickly if a return is within scope, to know that that the taxpayer has all the documents that they need, whether it's uploaded or provided physically, and that that all of the questions have been thoroughly answered in an interview. And that's, I think, really important to quality. I also think when you talked about team, I think that in order to get, and Desmond also mentioned this, in order to get volunteers to come back, we have to create that same team environment. When you think about why people volunteer, it's to give back to their community, to be a part of a community. And I think we have to create that virtual community that we had in person, and to keep communication channels easy and open by a variety of means. So if it's weekly Zoom calls where you discuss, what's going on and discuss, different tax law that's challenging that you've encountered during the week, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think that's going to be valuable going forward, just having a strong line of communication and bring all that together. I'm glad you guys have brought that up. I know that there's a lot of talk around volunteers, and I think there's a saying, I'm not sure if I'm misremembering it, but like great quality starts at intake, right? You having volunteers who ask the right questions, critical value to helping ensure that all things done properly. But Sarah, if you're going to be fully virtual, you got to trust that your volunteers will be able to do it on their own, but also give them channels for feedback. I think that another sort of the last wrap-up question in this really quick conversation is about a red flag on sort of returns that will require further examination. You brought up, Sarah, some stuff about the EIP, but I'm curious, what do you see as some red flags on the return?
For us, it's always the earned income tax credit. If people don't receive the earned income tax credit, we want to know why, because we're mostly serving people that are within that income qualifying category. And so if it's that they don't have a social security number, or maybe they they're single and they make just a little bit too much, but we just want to make sure before we leave the return that we know why they aren't getting that credit. And then I think the other thing is that I think that this year is going to be challenging for people to manage their withholding, because a lot of people have experienced periods of unemployment, may or may not have had withholding on their unemployment, depending on what their particular situation. And so I think there may be people that owe, and we want to have a script prepared to explain what taxpayers' options are.
I think for me, the red flag situation is that generally, maybe it's not so much on the federal side, and I just wanted to comment on Sarah's comment about the earned income credit, is that we've noticed a drop in earned income credit, the number of earned income credit returns over the years, because we just seem to have a lot of single returns. We might have had a household that is above the EIC limit. So in our case, red flags generally is at the state level, understanding how the software works as far as your pension deductions. There are some things that will automatically carry over from the federal data entry point to the state returns, and then there are some that are not. So an understanding of how the state software works would be fairly critical. as an example, one of the things that I look for is when I've got a profile of a retired individual. I use the quality review print set and I look through the 1099s to see who the payer is. And if it's a military situation or a public pension recipient, that to me is a red flag to see if the preparer went into the state software and recorded the amount because of the deductions at the state level. So I'm more interested in their knowledge of the software, and that's where that tends to come into play. Another thing would be if you've got some military clients and they're active duty. Again, at the state level, are those wages taxable or not, and how are they handling it? Again, it gets back to knowledge of software. So it depends on the type of income that we're dealing with is what really draws the red flags, like in my opinion.
Yeah, wow, that's great insight from both of you, and I appreciate your taking the time for this really, again, very quick, very abridged conversation. But before we sort of sign off formally here, I want to ask you, what is one thing you would want to give to returning VITA volunteers who are concerned about, improving their quality even throughout this pandemic? What's one sort of pearl of wisdom? I'll throw it to either one of you right now.
This is for returning volunteers?
Yeah.
I think it is really being thorough, and if you aren't 100% sure, always checking your resources and doing the research. I think that I rely on our returning volunteers for the trickier issues with education credits and things like that, and you really have to look it up. It's not something that you can memorize.
I would probably tell my returning volunteers to keep an open mind throughout the year, because we're going into fairly uncharted territories as to how we're doing business. To some degree, I think as we keep our focus on doing a correct return, how we get there, it might be anybody's guess. But know who that you can go to get the answer that you need to get the job done.
So true.
So true. And with that, I thank you, Desmond and Sarah. I appreciate that and look forward to hearing a little bit more from the Knights of the Tax Roundtable in the future.
Thank you, Justin. This was very interesting. I hope this is going to be helpful to our people in the network.
Thank you, Justin.